Give a little bit of introduction. I'll give you the macro view of what I'm going to cover. I'm going to split it off into three main categories. The last one is going to be Q&A, kind of roundtable type thing. So just keep questions in mind as you come. If you want to ask things as I'm going along, that's totally fine. We're in a smaller format, so it's not as disruptive as if we had like 100 or 200 people. So feel free to just...
We don't even have that many music pages.
Exactly, there you go. So my name is Christopher G. Keene. I've been talking with Derek for a little while now about getting up here and talking to you guys. I did my undergrad work at the University of Maine in Orono. I did some grad work and got my Kodai certification at the New England Conservatory here in Boston. I've taught the last several years in the Boston school systems outside of Boston in Dover, Sherborne, and directed a bunch of musicals in that time. First show was Children of Eden. It's what Stephen Schwartz wrote before he did Wicked. The most recent was West Side Story with a full pit orchestra. Did a couple of shows with middle schoolers and with elementary schoolers as well. Those were the two big high school shows. So the general idea of today's talk is going to be around approaching your first musical from a director standpoint. Most music ed programs, I don't know whether this is true for UMass Lowell or not, but most programs don't really touch on this at all. You get out there and it's a part of some jobs, but 90% of the time it's a stipended position that is sometimes sourced from the community. It's not always somebody who has a music degree. It's not always the choir director at the school. Sometimes it's the band director. Sometimes it's just the parent of one of the families in the community. So the colleges don't feel the need to necessarily prep you, which is fair. But for many of us, we know that this is going to be something we'll probably end up doing. That we're passionate about it, we enjoy it, we might have been in a musical before, we might have not, but we know that it's something we're interested in doing. Also, it brings in a pretty good side income, because teachers are not exactly rolling in the dough these days, as we know. So the big things I'm going to talk to you about today are the mindset to approach as you're working with yourself as a director and as you're working with your students as performers. We could get into a big discussion of tips and tricks and all that sort of stuff. I worry that in an hour-long talk, that feels very satisfying. You know, we watch the TED Talks and we watch the YouTube videos, we go to the NAfME conferences, we do these things, and we want to hear 10 easy tips for directing your first show. You know, that makes us feel like, oh, I'm accomplishing something. Great, I got those 10 easy tips. And then 2 years from now, you wouldn't be able to name any of those tips. So if it was all about facts and tips and little things you needed to know about being a director, the best thing I could do is sit, write out maybe 10 of them, and just say them to you 52 times in the next hour to drill them into your subconscious. And that would accomplish more than almost anything else I could do. Luckily for you, and luckily for me, because that's boring as hell, the key to being a good director is not in the things you do. If you name any of those little tips and tricks that you could share, and we could all share things that we think would apply to successful directors, you can find counterexamples who don't do any of those things. You know, if you look at the best directors you've had in your bands and your orchestras and your choirs, and you say, oh, they have to have blank. A lot of people would say, oh, they have to be great with people and be, highly energetic and extroverted. But we've all had that great conductor who's very calm and stoic and very short with words, but amazingly expressive and brings a great thing out of the ensemble. So it's hard to say that any one thing, one personality trait goes into being a great director. I don't believe it's about the things you do or the things that make up you. It's about the mindset behind it. It's about the approach you take for yourself and for your students. So we'll talk about that for a little bit. We'll talk about the 3 stages of any show, the pre-work, stuff that goes on before you've even casted the show and started, the actual work stage, when you're rehearsing and getting towards show night, and then the final product, when you're putting it out on the stage and getting it out there. There are key steps within each of those areas. I'll help you guys figure out where your deficiencies are, things that you need to catch up on, things that you should start working on that you might not have thought of yet, that you won't realize until you're in the pit and going, crap, I never learned how to do this in school. I'm going to learn to do it in the next 2 days. Awesome. So we'll go over those things too, and then the last third of the talk will just be a chance for us to chat, for you to ask any questions, and for me to give some guidance toward wherever you are in your stage of development, toward being the most amazing director you can be. And I believe we never really reach that level of being fantastic. One of the first mindsets that a great director has is that they're always learning and growing. They're a consistent student. If you feel like you've reached it, like you know everything you're doing, you're going to stop working, you're going to stop being hungry, you're going to stop trying new things, you'll fall into the old patterns, and eventually those old patterns will stop working. If you guys even just think back to when you were kids, when we were kids, I'm only 26, so right here with you. But classrooms in elementary schools were a lot different for our generation than they are right now. If you guys have been into any schools in the last couple of years observing, the attention spans have rapidly shortened. It's amazing, because we had pretty short attention spans compared to our parents. But today's kids, I mean, like after 15 seconds, they've got nothing. You know, they need to have their iPads in their hand. They're like completely disengaged. They've got a million, exactly, the bills are already coming out, you know? So the world changes, and we need to be ready for that, and we need to grow and change with it. And the people who are still teaching the same way they were 45 years ago are not doing a very good job of it, in general. They might say that the cores have not changed, and that's true. The core of what makes a good teacher has not changed in 40 years. But if their classroom looks the same as it did in 1980, their students are probably completely disengaged, in my experience. So the big thing I want to talk about from the start is that there are 3 different categories I teach for musical ensembles, whether it's a musical theater production, a choir, an orchestra, a band, an a cappella group, whatever. There are 3 main categories you can break them out into, and these are based upon what your primary goal is. There's a lot of bleed over, you know, everybody cares a little bit about everything, but it's about, at the end of the day, you sometimes have to make tough choices between priorities. Do you spend an extra hour in the practice room, or do you spend an extra hour sending out more resumes? You know, the person who thinks that the key to getting a good teaching job is being the best player of their instrument is going to spend the extra time practicing. The person who realizes that it's more about getting more contacts and who you know might spend that hour calling their friends and letting people know and replying to ads online. So it's all about what those priorities will happen at the end of the day. The first category of groups that we're going to talk about is the performance-type ensembles. Performance ensembles prioritize the aesthetic quality of the final product more than anything else. We've all hopefully been part of groups like that, because they can be some of the most rewarding that we ever experience. For many people, their college time is the last time they get to experience a group that's truly focused on that and nothing else. Often it's groups like professional opera companies, symphony orchestras, college orchestra and band and choral programs. A lot of ensembles like that can fall into the performance bucket. They don't necessarily, as we'll see, but they can. And what that means is, at the end of the day, when you have to make hard choices, the choices always come down in favor of correct notes, correct rhythms, solid interpretation, great expression, being true to the composer's vision. Those are the things that drive your decisions. The second bucket we're going to talk about is entertainment-focused ensembles. These are groups that don't really have low performance standards. It's not that they ignore that, but when they have to make hard decisions, it falls into the category of things that will entertain the audience more. So they have to make a choice between something that isn't necessarily artistically valid or authentic to the vision of the composer, but they think it might be a little bit more engaging for the audience. They might take that risk. So a lot of little nouveau avant-garde groups might be more like that. You know, if you see Bach with a laser light show, that's a group that's focused on connecting to their audience a little more than on historical performance practice.
Kind of on the beach.
Sure. So a lot of modern opera companies are like that. You'll see a Mozart opera staged with jeans and ripped t-shirts, and that's not so much focused on the authentic performance as engaging a new generation of audience. So there's no, you know, as I teach you these frameworks, there's none that are better or worse. It's about different contexts. So the a cappella groups you guys might be a part of, pop groups that you see, a lot of school ensembles fall into this entertainment category. You see teachers who say things like, oh, well, you can't pick that kind of song because it bores the audience. That's where they're revealing to you that their underlying motivation is entertaining the audience more than anything else. Doesn't mean that's the only thing they focus on, but it means that when they have to make a hard choice, that core definition of how they see the group guides their decision. For entertainment groups, the definition is this going to bore my audience or excite them? And sometimes that makes us make non-artistic choices. The final group, which is where I fall, and where many people claim to fall, but I very rarely see people authentically staying there, and where I'm going to encourage you today to decide to fall yourself, is the educational ensemble. The educational ensemble, I believe, is an ensemble where every member, from director to support staff to members of the audience to performers themselves, leave as a better person and a better artist than they entered. If you spend a full, I'm sure you've had this experience, spend a full semester rehearsing with a group, you go and you perform, and then you leave and you go, wow, I really learned the trombone part to the Mozart Requiem this year. Got that down. That's solid. What else did you learn? You know, I learned some like solid scales. You know, we warmed up with a lot of scales in the beginning. I got that too, you know. So it's what did you leave with, you know? And so in a performance ensemble, you often leave saying, I had a really great aesthetic experience. I made something beautiful, and I feel better for that. That's a great and valid goal. For an entertainment ensemble, you leave and say, I really impacted that group of people. They gave me a standing ovation. There was cheering. It was wonderful. It was amazing. I got 1 million hits on YouTube. You know, I got the record contract, whatever. It's that validation through other people. With the educational ensemble, it's the validation inside yourself. You leave and say, I have skills now that I didn't have before. I've learned to negotiate my range better. I've learned to handle my vocal health better. I've learned new techniques that I never had been able to apply before. I stretched myself a little bit, not too far, but a little bit outside of my comfort zone. And I developed something new, and now I feel I bring something new to every piece of work I do in the future. And when a group isn't focused on the educational goal, what you see is they bring nothing from experience to experience. If you look at the sports model, which I know is not one that we relate to all that well, I didn't do, like, past like 5th grade soccer, I didn't do any organized sports, so I'm not speaking from a position of expertise here. But the goal for many of them within a school context is that each game they have new skills and new insights they're bringing to the next game. That the game you play in the playoffs is played in a different way than the first game you played in the season, because you were a better player than you were when you started. In too many ensembles, we see that the players have not changed over the course of years of being involved with them. That you do the musical your freshman year, you do it your sophomore year, you do it your junior year, you get to your senior year, you might get a better play, you might get a better role. But that's more by virtue of you being older and having a better instrument now, not necessarily because you have different skills than you did when you entered. Same thing in your ensembles here, that often your performance skill will determine which level ensemble you get into, but you're not necessarily gaining anything from the rehearsal process and performance process. You're gaining from the hours you're spending in practice room. And a good quality performance ensemble or entertainment ensemble can give you the motivation to do work on your own that will make you grow. But the ensemble itself is not necessarily nurturing growth in you. It might nurture some, but at the end of the day, the educational ensemble's only focused goal is that you're a better person, a better performer, a better artist, a better student, a better learner through having been in that experience. I encourage you to take that approach both as director and as student. We're going to look at that through the lens of musical theater as we go on. So I want to give you a little bit of background on some of the musicals that I've run, some of the big roadblocks I hit. Not that you'll hit the same ones, but just to show you that you will hit similar roadblocks. You probably won't be able to predict what they are. They'll feel catastrophic and life-ending when you get them. And I'll share some of mine, and I might start tearing up when I do because it can be very painful. But I want you to know that people have gone through it before you and come through on the other side. So my first show was Children of Eden. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the show, but Stephen Schwartz, who wrote Wicked and Godspell and Pippin, this is one of his big shows. It never quite made it to Broadway because it's such a huge show. It's essentially an opera. It's 3.5 hours. There's probably 10 to 12 minutes of the show that doesn't have music in it. Really, I mean, it's incredible. And all the chorus numbers are full 4 to 6 part harmony. You don't get these, the most recent show I directed was West Side Story, where half the chorus numbers are just unison the entire time. Like, there's nothing to it. The orchestra parts are very difficult in West Side. But the performance stuff for the kids is nowhere near that level. Children of Eden was a huge beast of a show, and I had never directed a musical before. I had no training. I'd been in a couple of shows as a kid, but I was never even a lead. I mean, the closest I got was like Thenardier's in Les Mis. You know, just like the supporting funny role that gets one song. And this show was 7 hours long, or at least it feels that way for Les Mis. Anyway, so Children of Eden was a wonderful, amazing experience for me, but it was in many ways soul-crushing. Because I had gone through music education as my major, like many of you. You know, you guys are the ones who are here at the clinic. You're the ones who are motivated. You're probably the ones who go to All-State and go to All-Eastern and go to the conferences. And you know, I lost a girlfriend in college because I wanted to stay up late at night reading my conducting book instead of making out. So you know, I know maybe you're not as motivated as I was. but you know, I'm like sitting there practicing solfege instead of watching the Disney movie that we're supposed to be watching on a date or something. So I understand that high motivation, and I never really faced a lot of major failure in college. Because as you guys know, a lot of your peers don't put that much effort in. You know, so you don't have to work super hard to be in the top 20 to 40% of your class. You know, it's really not that hard. And really the hardest thing of being a music major is when you get to the top of your class, maintaining motivation above that. To say, oh, I'm already the best violist, the best tenor. By my sophomore year, I was the best tenor singer in my school, just objectively. I wasn't good, but there weren't a lot of other good singers in my school. It was a state school, it didn't have a ton of great singers, you know? So after a year, I was like, okay, I've got this. And then I stopped practicing for the last 2 years. But I focused on other things as well, you know, conducting and solfege and ignoring women, you know? Not ignoring women. Just deliberately ignoring the women that were in my choirs. Because as you'll see, as you begin to get more conducting roles, there's somewhat of the charm and the charisma of the podium that can sometimes overtake people. So you have to make deliberate rules for yourself to separate roles occasionally. and you will all experience this as you go on into your professional careers. So anyway, Children of Eden was a huge challenge for me because I did not have any piano experience before I went to college. I didn't get a rehearsal accompanist. It wasn't in the budget. I had been teaching the high school choir without an accompanist for a while. I'd never had a choir experience in college where I didn't have an accompanist. So I would encourage you, if you are a vocal person or will ever be working with choirs and you don't have a lot of piano experience, to force yourself before you graduate to run a couple rehearsals without a pianist there, to figure out how you're going to do it. Because it may happen. It might not happen to you, but over the course of your first 10 or 15 years of teaching, there'll probably be a year where you can't afford a pianist to be there with you for every rehearsal. And you don't need a pianist. In choral context, I mean, I do everything from a context of teaching literacy. So I teach my kids movable do solfege with hand signs. They all have tuning forks, and they run their own rehearsals, split off in the corners of the room. So that's sopranos, altos, tenors, basses over there. They mark in their solfege by hand. They take their tuning fork and figure out, okay, we're in the key of E flat, so A is going to be Phi, sharp 4, go up to 5, the B flat, and then down to 1 for the do. Now I've got my key. Let's sing it through without rhythm, and then pad it into the rhythm, and then apply the solfege on with the rhythm. It takes a lot longer to learn it that way, rather than just banging out the notes on the piano. But instead of taking a week to learn the notes, and then be correcting those notes for 3 weeks, I just take 3 weeks to learn the notes, and then they're learned. They know it. When they teach it themselves and are figuring it out piece by piece, they don't ingrain the mistakes they get when you're flubbing around trying to play the piano for them, or when they're trying to hear what's going on in the piano. They also maintain rhythmic integrity. Piano's a percussive instrument, and anybody who claims that they're not following the piano when they're in a choir rehearsal, you can prove them wrong by going over to your accompanist and saying, leave out the 8th note in this phrase. Play every note except for the 17th. Just pick a random note. Don't tell the choir, pick one random note that they won't play. They'll magically stop singing as soon as that note comes out. They will sing right along as long as the piano's there, but they're always listening to that microsecond of the pitch before they start. And when you leave that one pitch out, even though you're in the middle of a phrase, they'll go, and they won't know why they stopped singing. They'll just think it's a coincidence that they magically stopped singing right where you told them to. It's incredible, but it works every time with amateur singers. I mean, if somebody who reads music very well, like, you know, they'll continue to go under. But you want to figure out what you're going to do with that rehearsal stuff. So I had enough piano skill by that point to be able to at least plunk out melodic lines. In a musical theater context, you're not going to be able to teach all your singers to read. There's just not enough time. It's not realistic. I was lucky that about half the kids from my choir were involved in the show, so they were able to learn a lot of their parts on their own. They would actually get annoyed when I'm punking out notes on the piano and go, Mr. Keene, can we just go in the corner and do solfege on our own? And I'm like, any authentic music teacher would be like, oh my god, they just asked to stop plunking parts and sight read instead. How amazing is that? You're like, yes, you can definitely do that. But I had enough note plunking skill to plunk basic melodies out there. My solution to this, Children of Eden is a 400-page piano vocal score. Not even the full score. Piano vocal score, 400 pages in 2 separate volumes. With no chord symbols. Oh. So all orchestral reduction, 2-hand piano. So I took a month and a half before the first rehearsal and marked every single chord symbol into that score from the very beginning. I had enough basic jazz information to be able to read from a simplified chord chart. If it says C, G7, D, E7, B flat 9, I can read that enough to provide harmonic texture. And what I very quickly learned was that as long as the harmonies are there, the kids don't know the difference between the full orchestral version and just the outlines of the chords chunked on major beats. So there's no way, unless anybody in here is in like 6th grade right now, there's no way you're going to learn to play the piano well enough to play open score orchestral reductions for your first musical rehearsal if you direct your first musical in the first 10 years of your career, and if you haven't already had 10 or 15 years of piano lessons. Classical piano just doesn't come that fast. I would love to be proven wrong. If you want to spend 7 hours a day in the practice room and prove me wrong and learn it in 2 years, go for it. But you can teach yourself chord chart playing in that short of a time. It took me about 6 months to get myself ready. Between marking the notes in the scores and then playing through them and getting used to the patterns, you start to see those patterns, especially if you've done your theory work and your ear training work. You start to quickly see, okay, this is the dominant going to the tonic, and now we're going to the relative minor. And even when you change the key, it's still the same basic sound. I don't know what ear training system you guys use, fixed do, movable do, numbers, movable. So yeah, so it's as long as you're thinking in terms of a movable relative system, then chord chart playing makes total instinctive sense. And I would encourage you to take that effort. And it was actually a blessing that the chord charts weren't marked in that score, because the process of looking at every chord and analyzing it and writing in the pop symbols allowed me to pretty much memorize every piece by the time I started playing them, because I was the one who had to analyze every single one and start to look for it. So that would be the quick and dirty approach. If you find yourself in that situation where you don't have an accompanist, you've got a full score, you know you can't play it, and you're going, crap, what am I going to do? There are also some other workarounds now, because we live in 2014. There are rehearsal tracks. There are software systems that you can tap in the tempo, and they will adjust to what you tap. I had to do that with West Side Story at one point, because West Side Story doesn't reduce into simple chord chart changes. It's basically a full orchestral symphony with a ballet on stage, with some accompanying acting and singing as like a nice little obligato thing. But it's not really the point. It's an orchestral symphony with a ballet that happens to have a little bit of talking and singing in it. So that I use more technology to support me, but there are plenty of numbers that I can still play from a chord chart style. But that's an example of the first stage that we're going to talk about of getting to the musical. The first stage is the pre-work, the stuff you do before you ever get in front of the kids. So one of the big things is prepping your score, but you can't do that until you know what show you're going to do. You've got to pick the show, and you can't really authentically pick a good show until you know what your forces are going to be. You have to have a generic idea. Now, you're not always going to be that lucky. You know, there's always going to be random kids who come in who you didn't expect, or kids who don't come in who you were really hoping to get, which happened to me. I've had 3 students go on to Berkeley to be professional, singing majors in the last couple of years, and 2 of them didn't audition for their senior show. You know, the kids who you're like, oh, they're going to be the lead, like, no matter what show I pick, they'll be the lead, just didn't show up to auditions. Like, yeah, I'm kind of busy with lessons, I didn't really want to. I'm like, pick the show for you. Luckily, I work in a community where most of the kids have been taking voice lessons since their mother was in the womb, so I don't really need to worry about, 9 out of 10 kids that I worked with had more years of vocal training than I had, so I was lucky that there were other kids who could cover. You won't always be that lucky, so I am thankful that that covered my butt. But you want to pick a show that reflects the forces you have. There are there are tons of forums online where you can check different things. I'm not going to give you a list of shows and talk through things, because that always changes from year to year. New things come out and things go out of popularity, and you pick the perfect show, and then you realize the school down the street is doing it too, so you can't do that this year. So there's 100 things that come into play there, but pay careful attention to the balance of male versus female leads, to the range. You don't want to pick a show that has a really strong high soprano lead and all of your best female actors are altos. You've got one girl who can kind of squeak out the high notes, but she's not a very strong actress. You know she's going to be put into a position she can't really learn from. So it comes back to that mindset we're approaching it with. If we approach it with the educational mindset, with I want every student to leave as a better singer, a better actor, and a better person than they entered, then the goal is to find something that's just a little bit outside of their current ability range, but enough room for them to grow into it. I was talking to a good friend of mine who's also a musical theater director as I came in here, and he said, on the theme of picking the right show, it's a lot easier to fit the shoe to the person than to fit the person to the shoe. If I've got a size 7 shoe and you've got a size 8 foot, I've got to do some pretty dangerous surgery to get you into that shoe. It'd be a lot easier to just find a better shoe. But if you're working with a 7-year-old kid, you probably don't want to give them a perfectly fitting shoe. Because within 2 or 3 weeks, it's not going to be a perfectly fitting shoe. if you're feeding that kid appropriately and he's growing the way he should give him a shoe that has a little bit of extra wiggle room. And that way, that shoe will last him a lot longer. If the kid's dealing with this giant growth spurt in the middle of puberty, you want to give him a shoe that has an inch or two in there so that he's not going to be getting new shoes next week. It's the same thing with the shows you pick. If you pick a show that is perfectly within their performing range today, then the 3 or 4 months of rehearsal is going to be very boring for them. It's the same thing when you're working with a repertoire for any ensemble. If you pick something they could easily perform today, they'll feel great. They'll celebrate it and be like, oh, this is awesome, we're amazing. And then a week later, they'll be like, why are we still playing this piece? Why can't we get something else? And you probably had that experience in some of your ensembles here, where you get a piece and you go, oh yeah, this is great, we can play this perfectly. But then after a week or two, you go, this is way beneath us. Why are we even wasting our time on it? And that's the trap you'll fall into if you start listening to what your kids want to play. They say, oh, please let us sing this song. Oh, let us do this. Oh, let us do this piece. Oh, we all want to do this show. They want to do things they think they'd be successful at. They don't see that they need to leave room to grow. That's your job as their leader, to allow room for them to grow into it. So once you pick the appropriate show, the next most important thing you can do is your casting. And after talking with dozens and dozens of different directors, I can tell you that pretty much everyone agrees that if you cast right, you've done about 80% of your job. It's the same thing that most of you are instrumental majors. If you put the right people in the right chairs, you know, and especially with like younger ensembles when kids are still figuring out what instrument to play, if you pair the right kid with the right instrument, you know, a kid comes in and says, I want to play mellophone, but I also play the viola, what should I do in this ensemble? You make the right choice there, it's going to make your life a lot easier than if you make the wrong choice there. The right people in the right roles will always do amazing work. And the right person in the wrong role will never give you the result you want. And you can spend the entire 3 months trying to hammer this kid into the right position, and it just won't work. You know, one of the analogies I use a lot, which I don't know why I use it because I'm not a manly man, but the idea of a toolbox. We all have different toolboxes. Some of us have a really nice, big, shiny hammer and a really small, ineffective screwdriver. And some of us don't have a wrench at all. We all have different tools that apply in different areas. I'm really good at being energetic and engaging a crowd and talking to new people. I'm very self-confident there. I'm not so good when I need to sit in the background and just kind of let things go on around me and never interrupt and never step in. It's not my wheelhouse. I don't have a strength there. But we can sometimes work around situations that don't call for our tool by using our tool in a different way. I was coaching a friend who's very good at working with people. And I was saying, you know, sometimes your people skill might be your screwdriver. And so if you use your screwdriver 99 times out of 100, a lot of times you're going to see things that require some screws, and that's fine. You've got your screwdriver, you'll do great. And sometimes you'll run into nails, and you go, crap, I don't have a hammer. Well, you know, I can use the handle of my screwdriver, and it's not as good as a hammer, but I can kind of get in there. And then sometimes you run into a nut and a bolt, and the screwdriver's really useless. I mean, if anything, it's actually an impediment, because now your hand is full and you can't use both hands to twist the nut and bolt. You know, there are sometimes where your tools actually get in your way. And that's what your students are going to feel like if you put them in a wrong role for them. If you take a kid who has a really strong comedic acting skill, and you're like, oh, you know, I want to stretch them and give them a good dramatic role, and you make them the pivotal dramatic role, you make them Javert in and the kid's only ever played comedic roles in his life and never done anything dramatic, you know? Or you give them Fontaine and then you do the death scene and like bring tears to the audience. Exactly, you know, and they're set up for failure. You know, that's giving the 7-year-old a size 13 wide boot. You know, there's room for growth, but maybe a little too much room for growth. This kid's not growing into that anytime soon. You know, we don't have 3 years to develop them as an actor. But there are times where you want to stretch them like that. When I just did West Side Story, we had an amazing classical vocalist, incredible girl. She was winning competition. She won like the National Nats high school competition. She has sung pieces for the Boston Museum of Science that they've used in like their astronomy shows and stuff like that. She's like an incredible performer, operatic. Like, so you pick West Side Story, everyone knows she's Maria. Incredible operatic voice, classical talent, just insane blonde, you know, bombshell. She fits the role. She can do it. She can, you know, it'll be great. But we decided to make her Anita because this girl had always been that lead, beautiful princess, wonderful classical voice, high soprano type role, and she had inside her, it wasn't a giant leap to go to that power, more dramatic, more belty, a little bit lower suited. It wasn't outside of her range. It was a little bit of a stretch for her, but she was at a level where she could handle it. There was no chance of her falling flat on her face. Her strong performance skills would back her up, no matter what. She also played Eve when we did Children of Eden the previous year, which is more of that dramatic role as well. Everyone was shocked when she became Anita, but she did an amazing job with it. She did incredible, and now she has that to add onto her resume and to add to her list of experiences, and she is a better performer, a better singer, and a better person for having explored that side of herself through that role. Would she have probably made a better Maria? Yeah. Would the show have been better if she was Maria instead of Anita? Probably. I mean, like 1% better, it was still really good, but like 1 or 2% better, sure. But my goal is not to entertain the audience, my goal is not to produce the best quality product. Those things are important. My goal is that everyone grows from the experience. And I knew it would be a challenge for me as well. I'd have to grow as a director to take this girl through the emotional journey of, oh my God, I was sure I was going to be Maria, why did I get Anita? What's going on? That's a challenge to me, to convince her that this is an opportunity. And what a wonderful opportunity for me to grow as a director, to put myself in that challenging position. Not so far out of my wheelhouse. It's not like I said to everybody, okay, we're not even going to do an orchestra, I'm going to play the full score myself. That's too big a shoe for me. That's like a size 27 shoe. I'm not learning to play West Side Story. I don't know if anyone's learning to play every note of West Side Story. I honestly watch accompanist sometimes and go, that's magic. They're not. They have like a CD player inside there. They're not actually hitting all those notes.
It's true.
it's what 9 times out of 10, that's what's going on. So you'll always run into certain problems as you're going through, and you need to be prepared to hit those as they come up. With West Side Story, a week before the show went up, half the pit quit without returning their books. So I was able to get digital copies of the pit score. I searched online and found somebody who had done the show previously, had scans, they sent me, I printed them out. I talked to parents, I talked to kids, I got a couple people to volunteer. I literally had an 8th grade, 7th grade kid at the time playing second violin in West Side Story. But he was like this genius prodigy kid whose parents had been giving him Suzuki since he was like 3 months old. He was insane, but adorable. But I got lucky and got enough people to cover, but it still was way less than I thought it was going to be. When we picked West Side Story, I had about half of the Boston Youth Symphony Orchestra commit to being in my band because they were so excited about the show. And I was planning to do a staged concert version of just the score to West Side Story without the singers or anything like that, just because the pit was going to be so amazing. I'd planned this whole thing out, I'd sold tickets, and then I ended up with a pit of 4 people 2 weeks before the show. I was able to double it to about 8 people by the time the show went up. But it was way less than I wanted it to be. It definitely wasn't a success from the orchestra standpoint. The kids did a great job, I felt really good about it. But I was worried I was going to lose my job. Because this show had been talked up so much, it was so hard, and I made so many promises, and then we hit that wall. And I'm going to tell you, I had a couple of sleepless nights. And I had a couple of days where I was in tears from how bad it was going and how worried I was. We had the first orchestra rehearsal and 3 people showed up. And the director looked at me like he just had no faith that it was going to come together. And like I had ruined his show. And we had a very close relationship, so it was hard for me to see that. I'm a very people-friendly person. I don't take well to people being disappointed in me. As I'm sure most people don't. There's one who's like, yeah, they're disappointed in me. That energizes me. Probably not a common personality trait. But it hit me very hard, because I was 24 at the time. And this guy had been directing shows for about as long as I've been alive. As much as we want to think of ourselves as professionals, most of us are closer in age to our students than we are to our peers. And so we see them more in a parental mentorship role than we do as a colleague, no matter how much we try to do otherwise. And the parents often see us just as one of their kids, a slightly older kid who's a little bit more talented and knows some more stuff about the show or whatever. But really, most of the parents in my community have kids who are older than me. A lot of my high school seniors have an older brother who's like 2 years my senior. And so I get comments from the administration and things like that, and from parents say, do you feel bad when they kind of treat you like a kid, when they don't give you that respect? And I go, they should be treating me like a kid. They have a kid who's 2 years older than me. Of course they're going to treat me like a kid. This soprano has a brother who's 2 years older than me. Of course she's going to treat me like just a guy who's like hanging around. I have to remind her to not call me by my first name in hallways and stuff like that. You got to say stuff like that. But at the end of the day, those things happen. A funny side story, which is the most embarrassing, hilarious, and potentially lawsuit-inducing thing that has ever happened to me. Happened during Children of Eden. I replaced a parent who had been directing the shows, and 3 of her kids were in the school system. They stayed in the school system, and all were in my first couple of musicals after I replaced their mom. So we ended up being very close. They ended up being very sweet, but the first couple months was very awkward. There was no overt hatred or anger or anything, but we just didn't really talk to each other. So there's this girl who was one of the leads in Children of Eden, if you know the show, was Yona. So we're in a rehearsal, I'm behind the piano, there's about 20 people, this little 20 kids in this rehearsal and me, and the director's in the other room working with some of the other leads on their blocking. We're playing through different stuff, and this student, she's a senior in high school, who's literally said hi to me 3 times in her life. Like, that's the total of our conversational history. She turns to me, and we were in a pause in between phrases, and she goes, "Mr. Keene, can I ask you a weird favor?" So my first reaction is, okay, where's this going? I go, sure. What do you want to ask? And she says, "Would you button this button for me?" That was my face. Yeah. And as you can, in case you can't tell, I'm pretty talkative. You know, I tend to come out of a shell with my people. I'm pretty good at coming up with good comebacks. You know, I'm a fast-thinking guy. Literally never been more speechless than I was in that moment. Completely froze, and just, I couldn't think of it. All I had to say was, "No. I will not." And she looked so confused, so innocently confused at why I would say no, and so offended. And everyone turns beet red and starts laughing. What you need to know about this girl is she's very prim and proper. She would never make a joke like that. Everyone's shocked, and I'm shocked, and I'm like, nobody knows what's going on. She starts dying and turning beet red. We realized what it was my button on my shirt was undone, and she was just being a little OCD about it, and was just like, "What's kind of bothering me?" We lose it, and just everyone is dying laughing, hysterically. In that moment, the director walks in to check on how the rehearsal's going. He sees 20 high school kids beet red, this girl in the middle of the room dying from embarrassment. Everyone's laughing, gasping, can't talk. He says, "What just happened in here?" One of the kids goes, "Goldie and her shirt and Mr. Keene in her chest." And he goes, "Okay, excuse me, I need to know what's going on right now." And we all start losing it even more. It's misinterpretation. So you'll have moments like this in your teaching that make you feel like the whole world's going to end, and then that make you realize they're just great stories to tell for the rest of your life. I also highly encourage you, if you're focused on diction and correct notes to the point where you'll break up a phrase into its individual pitches and rhythms, be careful with the song "My Country 'Tis of Thee."
Yep.
I've seen the error made by many middle school students and teachers happen during my student teaching, and I'm sitting in the back of the room going, "You need to move on right now. They have not picked up on it, but it's going to happen very soon. Please stop repeating the first 2 notes of this song." Anyway, digression aside, those things will happen to you as you're running through the rehearsal process. You're going to feel like, oh crap, everything's going to hell in a handbasket. And what you need to go back to, what I urge you to go back to, is reminding yourself that this is an educational experience. You're not in a professional theater house. You're not on Broadway. You don't owe money to stakeholders and producers and to ticket sales. You're there to make people better. You know, I like to say I don't teach music, I teach people through music. I don't direct musicals, I direct people through musical theater. And the goal is people development. It's taking those kids and making them better actors, better singers, and better people than they were when they walked in. And the focus there will allow you to see your roadblocks for what they are. When the pit quits a week before the show starts, you can say, all right, how can we learn from this? What do we need to do? Maybe we can pull some of the kids when they're not on stage and have them playing their instruments with their band kids. Well, how can we, can we connect to the community? Can we use this as a leverage point to get the community more actively involved? And that's when we were able to bring in 4 or 5 different parents who wouldn't have gotten connected to the school at all, and then they were interested in having their kids come to this school and start auditioning for this great musical that gets everyone involved. And, there are different ways to leverage it if you see it as a growth and learning opportunity, not just for the students, but for yourself. If you keep that focus there and say, well, you know what? If I can get through this, I'm going to be such a more amazing, skilled, passionate, confident director. If I can survive losing the entire pit a week before the show, how much better is that going to feel during the next show when something not as big happens? In my experience, every show is going to feel in that last week or 2 before the show, it's going to feel like it's going to fall apart. Something's going to go wrong. And I actually get excited now when something goes wrong. Stevie Wonder used to say, they did interviews with him and said, do you still feel those butterflies in your stomach, the nerves and everything like that when you go on stage? And he said, I feel those feelings that everybody feels, the tightness in the neck, the pulse racing, the butterflies in the stomach, but I don't call that nervous, I call that excitement. Feels the same, but I have a different word for that. You know, and I feel that pit of my stomach thing as we go into Hell Week and we realize, oh crap, we didn't assign anyone to costumes. We don't have costumes, and it's 4 days till curtain. What are we going to do? That hasn't happened to me yet. But things like that, when things like that happen, you know, when I realize, oh crap, my accompanist, who I booked 3 months ago to play for the shows, told me in the last week she couldn't do it. When I did the middle school show, when we did Rodgers and Hammerstein's Carousel, I lost my accompanist about a week before the final production. And it was a very piano-heavy show, and you know the kids wouldn't be able to handle it, and I finally found a friend of a friend who was able to come in at the last minute and for twice the pay, and do it with very little preparation. But you know, things like that happen. Sound systems go out, mics go out, sets fall down and get destroyed, kids miss their lines and completely forget to study for things. Kids go off on vacation the week before the show and forget to tell you about it until the day before they're leaving. Things like that happen. But when you can come at it from that mindset and say, I'm nervous about this, but I feel this pit of my stomach feeling, but it's not anxiety, it's not dread, it's excitement. It's me getting ready for the final production. It has to feel this way. And if it didn't feel this way, I'd be nervous. You know, now I go to the directors and I say, you know what, I'm so glad this thing went wrong, because if nothing went wrong, what that means is something went wrong and you don't know what it is. I'd rather have something big go wrong that I know what it is and I can work to fix it, than to get to opening night and go, oh, we never put the gels in the lights, so now we don't have any lights to use. You know, you never want that to happen. And with a musical, more so than a band or orchestra or jazz or a cappella or a choir concert, with a musical, there's so many moving parts that there's no way it's all going to be flawless by showtime. If it is, you pick too small of a shoe. If it's perfect the week before, you didn't leave room for growth. And the performances themselves should still be growth opportunities. The kids should still be learning. You should still be learning and growing from every show. You feel like that was flawless, it went absolutely perfect, and then you have a show next night, that means your shoe was too small. You didn't leave room to grow through the entire production run. So just encourage yourself that when those bombs happen, and I would say this, you know, extrapolate this mindset outside of musical theater and apply it to your career, to your private work, to pulling in private students, to applying for jobs, to doing your finals, to practicing your instrument. If you start to get toward a big milestone and go, everything's going right, nothing's wrong, that's the time to be nervous. Because either you're underselling yourself, or there's something big that's gone wrong and you just don't know what it is yet. You get to your jury and go, oh, I listed the Haydn quartet, but I never practiced that, and I didn't get a cello to play with me, and my accompanist doesn't have the score, and they're going to ask for it because it's the only Baroque piece on my jury sheet. Crap. You know, those are the things that hit you at the last minute. Those are the mistakes you don't want to happen. It's okay for big errors to come up, as long as they aren't things that show a lack of preparation on your part. One of the big things I want to push you for, and then I'll close on that and then do some talk time and question and answer, but 2 key concepts to focus on in your interaction with your students. The first one is that respect is earned, not given, based on authority. I cannot count the number of times that I've seen a teacher, especially new teachers and new directors, walk into a classroom and say, you will respect me because I am in the position of authority, I am the adult in the room, I am the one who's been brought in here to do this, give me your respect, and then I will give you respect. It does not work that way. With kids, it doesn't work that way with adults either, but adults will give you begrudging respect. They'll sit there quietly while they're seething inside their minds and texting on their phones and going out to the water cooler during break to tell everyone what a jerk you are. The kids will just flat out not listen to you. They're a little bit more honest in that way. We're lucky that way. You need to give respect to get respect. That idea of walking into a room and saying, give me your respect and then you'll earn mine, is like going up to a stove and saying, stove, give me heat and then I'll put some wood in you. It doesn't work that way. You can sit there and hope it works that way all day long, but it doesn't work that way. You need to put wood in before you get heat out. You need to put trust and respect and love out to your students before they're going to give it back to you. You know, even in a microcosm of that, here with this clinic, I could have very easily waited until the official start time and then come up and said, I am Topher Keene, here are my credentials, listen to all the amazing things I've done, here's why I'm awesome. Instead, I spent the first half hour before that talking to all of you, getting to know your names, what your major is, seeing where I can help you, offering some advice before you even started, chatting about whatever, and not trying to put an artificial air of superiority here. I mean, I'm probably max 1 or 2 years older than you guys, maybe 3, 4, you know, I'm 26. So there's no one who's more than maybe 5 or 6 years away from me here. That's not any substantial amount of experience. You know, it's short, maybe 19, maybe, you know, whatever. But I just turned 26 on last Monday, so that's so close enough. But there's no reason you should respect me just because of age and experience. It'd be stupid for me to assume that. I have very little more experience than you. I've been lucky that I've gotten to speak at small states, I've gotten to do my graduate certificate work, I've done some impressive things objectively, but that's mostly been because, you know, like this sort of thing. My friends would say, oh my god, it's amazing, you have to do a clinic at this school, that's so cool. I go, yeah, well, they didn't pay me, and I had to send an email to 50 schools before one said yes. So, you know, it's not exactly like it's that amazing. How many emails did you send? They go, oh, I've never reached out to any place. I'm like, well, yeah, they didn't come knocking down my door and calling, begging me to come in and teach them that stuff. You have to put yourself out there. You know, and so you have to put the wood in before the heat comes out. With your kids, it comes down to respecting them as artists, respecting them as people. You know, you got to go in with an atmosphere of love and respect and nurture, and show them that you're there to make their lives better and to give them a good experience more than anything else. I've often said in my classroom work that, you know, my kids will learn to sing better. You know, that'll happen. They'll learn to read music, whatever. But if none of that happened, if they gained no musical skills, zero music vocabulary, every performance was crappy, they couldn't read a note of music, but they came into a room where they felt loved and supported and respected as a person every single day, that is a much better goal for me than anything else. And a lot of people talk that way, just like a lot of people say they have an educational ensemble where the goal is to learn things, but when you get down to the week before the show, it's all about drilling notes. It's not about learning concepts. It's not about learning to be a better artist. It's about drilling in it so we don't make any mistakes, we don't want to embarrass ourselves. Or picking the pop piece that makes the audience clap along and have a fun time, more than picking the piece that gets people to learn and grow as artists. Those pieces can be learning pieces too, but it's all about what the reasoning was behind it when it was chosen. I like a good, you know, the storm is passing over, you know, whatever kind of song, whatever it is, you know. I've done the Seasons of Love from Rent with my kids before and stuff like that too. You know, we've all made those decisions. But if you keep that educational goal in mind and you look to apply that to everything you do with the students, they'll feel it. They'll know. You know, I still get letters from past students from 2-3 schools ago, from several years before. They'll message me on Facebook, they'll send me emails. Some of them still have my cell phone number because we went on like trips to like New York or something in case they had like emergency contact. And like I'll get a text 2 years later from some random kid who was a senior in an old school of like a picture of a cat or something. And they're just like, I was thinking of you, I wanted to send you this funny thing I found online. You know, weird stuff. I know, it seems weird, but when you make an impact in a kid's life, they don't forget that. And I bet most of you could name probably 2 or 3 teachers, most likely music teachers, since you're here now, who had that level of impact in your life. And if you had a way to reach out to them right now, if they were in the same, you know, relative generation to you and they were on Facebook and you had easy contact access, you might do something like, you know, have a good day in conducting class and send a quick note to them and say, hey, you know, I had this really great, you know, it went really well, I felt really great about it. I just wanted to say thanks again. You really made a difference for me, and, you know, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. You know, those are the things that feed me. You know, the money is not great. it's good to have it, but it doesn't pay all that well. The respect is not wonderful here in the United States for teachers compared to a lot of other areas of the world, but you get more respect than a lot of other professions. There are a lot of reasons that people go into education. At the end of the day, somebody saying, you changed my life, you made my life better, is a really good reason to be here. And I don't want to say that if you don't have that reason that you're not a true educator, but it's really what my belief is. I don't think I'm a good teacher. I actually think I'm a terrible teacher. The things that go into making a good teacher are things like filling out paperwork on time, being at all your meetings, being a good, you know, observer during lunch duties, and making sure that kids get appropriate punishments and grading on an appropriate scale. All the things that administrators talk about when they talk about being a good teacher. I think I'm a good educator. Educator comes from the Latin educare, which means to guide, to lead. I lead people toward their better self. I help them become more of themselves through the work I do. And I urge you that if you don't, it's not that I want you to take on my goal, but if you have the other goals, working with kids is not a good way to reach those other goals. You might want to go into the professional world, you might want to focus on working with adults, or going to somewhere like Broadway where you can work with kids, but they're focused on that performance level aspect, or work with the Disney Channel where they're focused on entertainment, but you get to still work with kids. In schools, you need to focus on helping them feel better as people and grow and learn, or else you're going to burn out. The burnout rate for teachers, especially music teachers, in the first 3 to 5 years is horrendous. In some places, it's upwards of 80% who drop out of education within the first couple of years. And a lot, I mean, even within the education programs here at the colleges, a lot of schools don't see more than 30 to 40% of their entering ed majors as freshmen graduate with a teaching certificate. It's a very high burnout profession. And in my experience, the thing that keeps us coming back and enjoying it and staying in it for the long haul and making an impact is loving the kids and helping them grow in everything they do. And not forgetting about ourselves. Loving ourselves and helping ourselves grow. Musical theater can be a great vehicle for that. Choirs, bands, orchestras can be a great vehicle for that. Math can be a great vehicle for that. I do coaching with business people, managers, and salesmen. That's a great vehicle for that. I do work with education majors and come in and speak at schools. That's a great vehicle for helping people feel better about themselves. So find what your deeper purpose is underneath. You might find different words for it than me, but I bet once you find something that feels authentic, if we were to sit for a couple hours and chat about it, we'd find that we have different words for the same concept. Helping people make their lives better through a certain vehicle we've chosen, which might be music, might be musical theater specifically, or it might be any of 100 other things. In 10 years, none of you might be music teachers, or you all might be directing shows. You might have directed 27 different musicals, you might have directed none. You might be doing sales work at a call center. You might be doing live performances on a Disney cruise line every night with your guitar. You might be President of the United States. I don't know. But any of those could be a great vehicle for that purpose. Any job can be a vehicle for helping people improve their lives better. And I think that's why we're drawn to music, because it helps us communicate, love others, and help them grow. So I hope that that's been helpful for you. I want to take, what do we got, like 5-10 minutes, and just chat a little bit. Any questions you guys have about specifics, I'm happy to give tips, like I said. And then I want to get a sheet of paper around real quick and just get your email addresses, and I'll send you some electronic resources. I don't do really paper handouts unless I'm doing like all-state conventions with the 40, 50-year-old generation, because I don't think our generation really keeps pieces of paper for more than a week or two. So yeah, I feel that that's probably authentic. You don't have binders labeled with a label maker sitting on your shelves at home full of old notes. But if I send you an email with here's my top 10 tips for music educator or whatever, then in 10 years you go to direct your first musical and go, crap, where's that handout that guy gave me? Instead, you can just search through your Gmail for musical theater Keene, and you'll find that old email because Gmail has like 900 gigs of free storage, so you'll never lose anything. Anyway, questions?